During this week, we are going to have both Xerneas and Yveltal in 5-star raids, and you will not want to miss out on either of these Pokemon for a variety of different reasons. I'm going to be going over the best counters for both of these Pokemon, and why they deserve a couple of your raid passes. Alright, how's it going everyone? Jinsula here with a brand new Pokemon GO video. I hope your day is going really well, and let's get right into it. Alright, so we gotta talk about both Xerneas and Yveltal. They're going to be returning to 5-star legendary raids, and for both of these Pokemon, they are actually quite good when it comes to the Master League. So having a 100% IV of either of these Pokemon and having them maxed out is definitely going to allow you to get ahead. But for people who do not necessarily care about PvP, unfortunately both of these Pokemon do get outclassed by other Pokemon, especially when it comes to raid DPS. So it might actually be worth it for you to skip out on both of these Pokemon if you want to save your raid passes for all the raiding content that's going to be happening next week leading up to Pokemon GO Tour. But besides all that, I still think these Pokemon are worth raiding, especially if you're struggling in PvP, so let's go over the best counters for both of them, starting with Xerneas. Xerneas is going to be a pure fairy type legendary Pokemon, which means it's only going to have 2 weaknesses, which include steel type and poison type attacks. It also has a double resistance to dragon type attacks, as well as a resistance to bug, dark, and fighting type attacks. You will want to avoid bringing any Pokemon with these typings because Xerneas is going to be really strong against them, and all of your Pokemon are going to be weak against this raid boss. Now, if you want perfect IVs, you will want one that is 2160, and if it's weather boosted, you will want one that is 2701. Xerneas is only going to be boosted by cloudy weather, which is a pretty common weather type during the winter months, so you might be able to get yourself a weather boosted Xerneas, and hopefully it's going to be perfect IVs, because when it comes to this Pokemon, it's going to be the best within the Master League, within the Go Battle League. Now, if you want to secure the win up against Xerneas raids, you will want a group of about 5 trainers that are at least level 35, but you could definitely duo this raid boss as long as you and your Pokemon are level 40 and you're bringing the absolute best counters. Speaking of which, let's talk about those right now. So, the one Mega Evolution that's going to be really good against Xerneas is of course going to be Mega Gengar with poison type attacks. And in terms of non-Mega Evolutions, you will want to go with Shadow Metagross as well as Duskmane Necrozma. Both of these are going to be the heaviest hitters. Now, a really good alternative is also Nihilego with poison type attacks. It's a really good Pokemon to use, especially if you do not have a Duskmane Necrozma. And then in terms of budget counters, you could go with regular Metagross with Meteor Mash. That's definitely going to be one of the best options, but you could also go with Roserade with poison type attacks, as well as Exadrill with steel type attacks. These are all really good budget options. Alright, next, let's talk about the second legendary Pokemon, which is going to be spawning this week, which is going to be, of course, Yveltal. This Pokemon is a dark and flying type Pokemon. It doesn't have a single typing, which means it's going to have more weaknesses compared to Xerneas. They include Electric, Fairy, Rock, and Ice, and in terms of the resistances, you will want to avoid bringing Pokemon with Ground, Psychic, Dark, Ghost, or Grass type attacks. Yveltal's perfect IVs are going to be 2160, and if it's weather boosted, it's going to be 2701. It's going to be the exact same as Xerneas, it's just going to be weather boosted by different weather types, which is going to be windy weather or foggy weather. Now, in terms of Yveltal, you will want to go with a group of about 6 trainers that are at least level 35, and if you want to challenge yourself, you can trio Yveltal with 2 other trainers. Just make sure you and those trainers are all level 40, with all of your Pokemon being level 40, and you're bringing the absolute best counters. And speaking of best counters, let's go over those right now. So in terms of Mega Evolutions, you have 2 really good options. They include Mega Diancie or Mega Gardevoir. Just make sure you're bringing Fairy type attacks, and they're going to be your absolute best options. Another really good option is of course Mega Tyranitar with Rock type attacks, but I would only bring that if your raid party consists of mostly Rock types. I would opt to go with either the Fairy type Mega Evolutions because they deal just slightly more DPS, and sometimes it's going to be a little bit more difficult to bring Mega Tyranitar, and it's going to be very move dependent. Now, in terms of non-Mega Evolutions, you will want to go with Electric types because they deal a high amount of DPS. This includes Shadow Raikou, and also Xurkitree, and also Zekrom. They're all 3 really good options. And then in terms of budget counters, you could go with the Rock types because the Rock types tend to be more DPS. These include Rhyperior with Rock type attacks, as well as Rampardos. These are all really good options to bring up against this raid boss. So yeah, it's very straightforward for both of these raid bosses. Unfortunately, they both have very different typings, so they're not going to see a lot of overlap in terms of what Pokemon you could use. You're probably going to have to form a team for specifically Xerneas, as well as another team specifically for Yveltal. That is, if you're planning to raid for both of them. But I would actually just pick and choose which one you will want to focus in on. Both of them are really good for PvP, but personally I would rather go with Xerneas because it's still a decent raid attacker alongside it being a really good PvP Pokemon. Yveltal is also really good, but it's mainly for PvP because when it comes to dark types, there's always going to be better options when it comes to raid damage. Another thing you should consider is that both of these Pokemon are very dependent on IVs, so if you do not necessarily care about PvP, then it's going to require a ton of raids for you to get a Pokemon that's actually going to be decent for raid battles. So I would opt to just skip both of these Pokemon if you want to save your raid passes for next week, because at the end of this week we're going to get the lead up event for Pokemon GO Tour, and there's going to be plenty of really good raiding content that's going to require your raid passes. And then on top of that, we do have the fusion forms for Kyurem making their debut during this year's Pokemon GO Tour, and those will definitely be worth your raid passes over Xerneas and Yveltal. So that is definitely something you should keep in mind during this week. Do not break the bank on spending all of your raid passes because you will definitely want to save them for the following weeks. It's definitely going to be more worthwhile. Oh, and I guess one last thing is that both of these shiny forms are going to be available as well, so those are actually pretty decent trade chips. I think a lot of players will request for shiny Xerneas when it comes to lucky trades, so that is definitely something you could stock up on during this week if you have a whole bunch of spare raid passes. But aside from that, I will say that these are both low priority Pokemon unless you're someone who very heavily PvPs. But in any case, yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know your thoughts regarding both Yveltal and Xerneas down below. Do you plan to raid for either of them? Is there a particular one that you're going to focus in on? Or are you going to skip out on this week in preparation for next week's events for Pokemon GO Tour? And let me know if you plan to use either of these Pokemon for PvP and what teams you're building around them. That's definitely some really helpful info. Make sure you share all of these thoughts in the comments down below, and let's have a great discussion. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it to be informative. My name is Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Jinsula